So just to start, to introduce our presenter and also why we, the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, got involved with this energy efficiency area of energy efficiency. We are part of the Energy Efficiency for All project, which is to bring together the energy and housing sectors to tap the benefits of energy efficiency for millions of Americans living on limited income. And we've been helping to plan these upcoming meetings with the utility companies who we've been working closely with to ensure that our developers and our stakeholders get really the most out of these energy efficiency programs that are available, and that there's open communication between the utility programs and our folks and our members. So I'm just going to introduce Elizabeth Marks, who's our presenter today. Elizabeth is an attorney for the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, also known as PULP, where she engages in complex litigation and provides advocacy, consultation, and support services in energy and utility matters on behalf of Pennsylvania's low-income residents and community organizations. Elizabeth holds a BA in Political Science and Women's Studies from Temple University and a JD from Widener University School of Law. Elizabeth, if you want to get started, thanks so much for getting on today.
Thank you, Tori, and thanks to everyone for taking a half an hour out of your Friday lunch hour to participate in this kind of a prep webinar. The intent is to provide, as Tori said, some overview information so that you all have a working knowledge of what the requirements are, of what the programs broadly speaking, are designed to do, and to hopefully get you all prepared to be active participants in the upcoming stakeholder meetings with utilities, which will be held. We'll talk about when they are and how to register for that. I believe Tori will share that at the end of the call. But we want to make sure that the dialogue is open. And in order to do that, you got to have a basis of information. So backing up just a second, Tori explained excellent what we at PULP do and what I do in my role at PULP. But I just want to note for folks on the phone, because many of you may not be familiar with PULP, but you may be familiar with our parent organization, Regional Housing Legal Services. We are a project of Regional Housing Services, an independent project, but we do work closely with them as the development of housing and affordable housing in particular in Pennsylvania is integral to the work that we do at PULP to make sure that utility services are available and affordable for the tenants within that housing. So that's what we at PULP do. We do a lot of statewide policy, and we get involved in proceedings before the commission. And if you have any questions from this webinar, or if you have other general utility questions, you can always reach out to us. My information is on the front slide, and all of our information will be provided in the last slide of this for my two colleagues that work in the project with us. And you'll see the logo on the right-hand side of our presentation today. This is our 20th year as being a part of Regional Housing Legal Services, so we're celebrating that anniversary, so I can't let that go without noting it. PULP's been around for 36 years, but we are celebrating our 20th year in partnership with Regional Housing Legal Services. So without further ado, I only have you for another 23 minutes, so let's jump right into what the requirements are as far as why we even have energy efficiency programs. Why do the utilities provide them? Well, in 2008, Act 129 was passed, and that requires utilities to reduce electric usage in every sector. And by sector, I mean residential, commercial, industrial classes. So those are considered different sectors, and that'll become important throughout this discussion to keep in mind that there are different types of customer classes and customer sectors. Multifamily housing, of course, often crosses sectors when there are residential tenants and when buildings are metered individually versus metered as a master meter. So it gets kind of nitty-gritty in there. So what Act 129 did was require this electric savings. And the way that utilities can achieve their electric savings requirements, they do so two ways. Primarily, they do so through energy efficiency programming. And that is, light bulbs, that is putting in combined heat and power, that is, going through the building and doing energy audits to find out where heat is escaping from a building, providing insulation, all kinds of different measures that can be installed in the home. Demand response is another way that they can reach their electric usage reduction. And those types of programming are usage curtailment. So it often requires folks, either industrial customers or sometimes residential customers, to sign up to voluntarily curtail their usage at certain peak hours. But what we're focused on is energy efficiency, of course. So the PUC sets, the PUC being the Public Utility Commission, they set savings and general program parameters for energy efficiency programming run by utilities. And we are now entering or entered the third phase of those programs. So really briefly, because this is good foundational stuff, Phase 1 started and was run through 2010 through 2013. It was a 3-year phase of programming. And in Phase 1, there was no specific percentage of savings that had to come from low-income customers, but there was low-income savings requirements. So, they had to target their programming towards low income. Now, Phase 2, which ran from 2013 and just ended recently in May of 2016, there was specific low-income energy savings requirements. 4.5% of the utilities' overall savings that they achieved had to be attributable to the low-income customer class. Now, in counting those savings, utilities during Phase 2 were permitted to attribute the savings that they got from general residential programs to count towards their low-income savings, meaning they could estimate and say, well, we think about, and there was requirements as far as how they calculated this, but they could attribute a certain percentage of folks that they believed would be low income participating in those other programs. So appliance recycling, for instance. They would say, well, low income makes up this portion of the population, and that's how much savings we're going to attribute to low income. That's important because that changed in Phase 3. The two things changed. One is that the percentage of savings increased from 4.5% to 5.5%. And utilities are no longer allowed to count in that 5.5% the savings that are achieved from general residential programs. So all 5.5% of the savings has to come from targeted low-income savings. Now that's important to the multifamily community because it's a pretty aggressive savings target, and utilities are going to be looking in new areas to find low-income savings. And so multifamily buildings where there are tenants that are low income can be counted towards those savings. So utilities are encouraged to include multifamily programming in their energy efficiency programs, and they're going to be able to count those savings towards this more aggressive savings goal for low income. So there's a bit more focus on how do we make these multifamily energy efficiency programs accessible, and how do we make them, build demand for those programs. That's a little background, and I will say that if you have questions as you go along, please type them into the question box because we'll either answer them as they come up or hopefully have a couple minutes at the end to be able to address them. But that's the background. That's kind of where we are. June 2016, Phase 3 programming went into place, and I'll talk about what that means for multifamily and what kind of the general guidelines of multifamily programming are throughout. But I want to start by posing this question, and if you have an answer to it now, type it into your chat box. The question being, what are the barriers to energy efficiency in multifamily housing? And I'll talk a lot about the barriers we know about, but being that you are the multifamily community, the builders, the operators of these buildings, we want to hear from you because it's really important to understand what the barriers are so that we can work with the utilities to design programs that overcome those barriers. So feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box as we go along, now, or if you think of something as we're talking, just type it in there. We'd like to capture that and have it so we can continue to think about what the barriers are and what to do about them. But moving forward, the barriers that we often see, first and foremost on the utility side and for the builders, right? So there's both barriers that the utilities face to providing the programs and barriers that builders and building operators face in accessing the program. So the first and maybe the biggest is meter configuration. So I don't need to tell you guys that multifamily building meter configuration can be a daunting thing to think about. There are all kinds of combinations. There's common areas, there's tenant units, sometimes they're individually metered, sometimes they're master metered, sometimes portions of the building are individual, and then there's the common areas that are master metered. And going back to what I said before, the utilities have to provide energy efficiency programs for all sectors. But they often do so. There's a lot of different considerations when you're treating a residential property as to when you're treating a multifamily property. So oftentimes the providers of energy efficiency, the conservation service providers, are well-versed in working with tenant or single-family homeowners, or they're well-versed in working with industrial and commercial clients. But multifamily presents an interesting barrier because it's a hybrid between those two. As a result of those split meter issues, there's also split incentives. So when a builder is thinking about investing in energy efficiency, who's reaping those benefits? And if the tenant is paying the utilities, they're going to get the benefit. And if they can't afford to adopt those energy efficiency measures, and the owner isn't going to get any benefit from implementing them, oftentimes it just goes undone. There's also, of course, lack of capital, especially in multifamily affordable housing. There's timelines as far as when you can make capital investments and when the utilities are making their program offerings. So a lot needs to align in order to make those programs worthwhile when you're able to invest in building improvements. And then, of course, there is the sore thumb issue of the PUC defining low income as 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. They do not, as the housing world uses, the area median income threshold. So as far as some of the specific low-income programs for multifamily, this presents a problem when you have mixed buildings where perhaps half the building is 150% or below, but the rest is, maybe 80% of area median income, and maybe you're not sure where they fall in the poverty guideline scale. So even just the language we use in the utility world interfacing with the language that you use in the affordable housing world, we need to kind of figure out how to bridge that gap and how to address the issues so that the programming works for your community. So going back then to what's in store for Phase 3 for multifamily, I just want to touch on the fact, each program is different and is at a different stage, and there are plans, and we'll talk about that, I'm only going to provide right now kind of the general guidelines that the PUC laid out as far as multifamily affordable housing requirements, and we'll talk about what some of the open questions are as far as designing those programs. But first and foremost, funding. And you'll see on the slide, there's a lot of funding available now for multifamily energy efficiency, far more than there has been in Phase 1 and Phase 2. So there's a breakdown here, but in PECO service territory, there is $13 million in dedicated funding for energy efficiency projects in multifamily buildings. $4.2 million in Duquesne, plus there are portions of other budgets depending on the type of metering. Same with PPL, there's $2.5 million, but of course a portion of their $40 million low-income budget is also available to affordable multifamily housing. There's $4.1 million plus a portion of $8 million low-income budget for Med-Ed, $4 million plus a portion of their $20 million low-income budget in Penelec, and then $880,000 plus a portion of their $6 million low-income budget. So together that can create some pretty effective and far-reaching energy efficiency programming. Now with respect, and I'm speaking generally about all the utilities, and of course each utility is going to offer different programs, but what each of the utilities did agree to do, and when I say agree, we did litigate these cases, so these plans, so in reaching settlements with them and getting decisions from the Utility Commission, this is where we landed as far as multifamily Phase 3 programming. The first being that the utilities are going to do their best, and there are some caveats there depending on the utility, to align their incentives and programming with PHFA's Qualified Allocation Plan, or QAP. So within PHFA's QAP, there are additional points if you adopt certain energy efficiency measures, either for a rehab project or for a new tax credit property project. And so we wanted to make sure that the utilities' offerings and the types of investments that are made align with PHFA's requirements, so that, of course, it would leverage that funding and make it more appealing for multifamily owners and operators to participate in these programs. They also are going to assist with completion of the PHFA energy rebate analysis. So in order to apply for that type of development assistance funding, you have to complete an energy rebate analysis. And so the utilities have committed to assisting applicants with completion of that. And then as a third point, each of the utilities agreed to do more to coordinate programming across multiple sectors, so that would overcome those barriers when you have mixed meter properties. In doing so, they each have a single point of contact that you can call to apply for, no matter what your meter is, if you're a multifamily building owner or operator, so you can access all the different available programming, whether it be in tenant units, in common units, or in common areas, or whole building projects. And then coordination between the subcontractors. So when there are multiple conservation service providers, they're not competing with one another, but rather they're working together to make sure that the programming reaches the clients. Now there are a couple of questions here I want to answer. The first being, what is the dollar limitations for multifamily household income for low income? And I don't have the chart in front of me, but it is the federal poverty guidelines, and it's 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. That generally works out to something like $20,000 for a household of two, but of course I don't have the chart in front of me, and I apologize for that. But that doesn't mean that if your building has multiple types of income that you aren't qualified for energy efficiency assistance. It may just vary as far as how much the utility is going to contribute. Even if you have no low-income people in your building or nobody that falls within 150% of the guidelines, say you have a building with folks that are all above 150, but of course, at 80% of the area median income, something like that. You're likely to still qualify for all types of different programming. It just may mean that in addition to the utilities contribution, that you also need to make a contribution. So it may not be free, but it may be significantly reduced cost. I hope that answers that question. The second question is, what is the definition of multifamily housing? And that's a great question. That varies by utility. But most of them are going to be 4 units or more or 3 units or more. So there's no requirement as far as families, but it's based on units. And I believe that all the utilities are, in fact, some of them are just 2 or more units. And there's a pretty long comment in here, so I'm going to try and answer it. I understand that there are incentives for multifamily, but based on what I have seen from at least one utility, only low-rise multifamily or whole buildings are eligible. What about buildings that meet Energy Star multifamily high-rise requirements? If these buildings are not eligible for incentives, a portion of PHA projects under the QAP are being left out. And I will say that I'm hoping that folks throw out the window what was the case in phases 1 and 2. We've done a lot of work with the utilities through the litigation of phase 3 plans to make sure that many of those barriers, such as how you define multifamily, who qualifies, and what the incentive levels are, have been changed. So, talking with the utilities about this at the upcoming meetings and about what your specific concerns are is, of course, really important. But as far as I know, at this point, all of the utilities are providing multifamily, and there's no low-rise versus high-rise or floor requirement in order to participate. So I want to jump back to what some of the open questions are. And this is really important as far as preparing for the upcoming meeting. And as I saw in some of those questions, there are a lot of confusion out there, and each program is going to vary. So participating in your utility's stakeholder meeting is important so that you get the details of each of their plans, and so that you can pose really important questions about how these programs operate and what it means for you as far as participating in the programs. So a couple of open questions that we see. First, there's this big issue of how is the utility going to verify tenant income? And that is an open question. There are a lot of ways that I could imagine that they could do, such as working with the building operator and getting income information. I know you all need to recertify your tenants as far as getting their income regularly, and so that process is one that's yet defined, but I think could be defined in a way that wouldn't be onerous on building owners and developers, but it would require some work with the utilities to let them know the ways that you verify income and how it might be easily translated to verify income for their programs. The other open question is, there's these programs, there's budget sets, and for some utilities, they've already determined what the eligible incentives and measures are, but not all utilities have defined what might be available. And there's a lot of custom programs which depend on what the building is. So talking about what eligible incentives, whether it be monetary incentives or rebates, or just direct installation where they come in and they, do every unit in a period of days or a day, and swap out old appliances or do installation work. All of those kinds of things are yet undefined in some of the utility areas. The next open question is, we don't quite know yet how the alignment of the QAP measures, the energy efficiency measures that are in the qualified allocation plan are going to align. So discussing that issue with the utilities is also important, as well as how the utilities intend to assist in completion of the energy rebate analysis. Of course, the application and the procedure for enrolling in the programs is also an open question. So we're hoping that more information will be provided at these stakeholder meetings, and that building owners and operators can share their concerns about whatever that process may be, so that we can make it better, so that folks are able to access the programs on a timeline that makes sense for their building. And then this last one about coordination across sector programs is I think, a pretty big one, and making sure that the utilities know what the challenges are and what your needs are in order to make mixed meter buildings be able to access the programming that they need. So there's another question here. What if you are running a small business from a multifamily household? Would this scenario be eligible? That's an interesting question, and I think it really depends on that. But of course, Act 129 is a lot broader than just low-income programs. That's just one small piece. So cobbling together the program, if there is a multifamily building that includes low income, it includes non-low income, you're going to be eligible for all different types of incentives. And of course, small businesses are also eligible for energy efficiency programming. So it would be a matter of working with the utility to cross those different sectors of customer class and create a package or an incentive program that would work for that individual. And it's my understanding that the utilities are ready and willing to do that. So quickly, I want to point out that there are links here to each of the utilities' energy efficiency plans. So we have, they are pretty dense, and you're always welcome to reach out to us either ahead of the meetings or in conjunction with the meetings. You'll get a lot more information at the meetings. But if you are one who likes to prepare before you go in, I would recommend taking a peek. And if you need help navigating the plan, because it's pretty dense with some legal language and some complicated programming and utility terms, just give us a call and we can try and help walk you through what the individual programs are proposed to be. I just want to note really briefly, I know we are more than short on time, but energy efficiency is also available through other programs offered by the utilities and by the federal and state governments. So the information is there, but real briefly, LIRP, the Low Income Usage Reduction Program, is available all the time for any low-income household. It does require landlord approval, but just because you live in a multifamily building doesn't mean that the tenant units don't qualify for LIRP. Also, of course, LIHEAP Crisis Interface may be able to provide furnace replacement, and the Weatherization Assistance Program run by DCED is also working on providing some multifamily policies that would allow more multifamily buildings to benefit from that program. And each of the electric utilities have committed and are required to coordinate their Act 129 programs with these other types of programs to both leverage the resources available and to streamline the costs. So it may be, that you'd benefit most by having your tenant units treated through LIRP, or that engaging in Act 129 and some combination of other programs. So I just wanted to point out that is available. Now, the upcoming stakeholder meetings are all being coordinated by the Housing Alliance. So Tori, did you want to talk about that, or did you have a
Sure.
different slide to put up?
Yeah, I could definitely talk about that. And thank you for presenting this this webinar. It was really, I think, hopefully it will give people some more information to go with when they're going to these meetings. So the first meeting we have is with Duquesne Light Company. It's going to be October 13th in Pittsburgh from 9 to 11:30 a.m. The next meeting after that is with PPL Electric Utilities in Enola, October 19th, 2016 from 9 to 11. PICO is October 20th from 9 to 11 in Philly. And First Energy is November 2nd in State College from 10:30 to 12:30. And some of these utilities have very broad service areas. So you can look up a map to see where your developments fall, or where they lie, to see who your utility provider is, because in some instances you may have multiple utility providers servicing your folks living in the multifamily buildings.
Awesome, and I think that Housing Alliance is going to be sending out more information about those meetings. Our contact information for any of the three of us at Pulp, feel free to give us a call if you have questions about your utilities plan and what they're intending to do as far as multifamily, or if you just have questions about what we presented today and you didn't ask it on the chat box, feel free to pick up the phone, give us a call, or send us an email, and we're happy to provide the information as we can.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And for those of you who can stay on the line for maybe a couple more minutes, I would love to open up the lines for questions and also see if any utility folks are on the call and if they want to add anything to the information we presented. So I'm going to unmute the lines, and again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to speak up. Thank you.
The conference has been unmuted.
Hi, this is Roy Diamond.
Hi, Roy.
Are the energy efficiency fundings largely based upon performance or based upon construction? I'm getting some background noise.
Sorry, I am too. For those of you who are not speaking, if you could mute, that would be appreciated.
So my question was, are the benefits based largely upon design and construction and then verified, or are they based upon performance? And if they're based upon design and construction, the tenancy in our buildings vary. So we could have an apartment that is occupied by an eligible person one year, and then someone who is not eligible the next year. How do we negotiate that?
Right, and that's an interesting question, and one I think that should be raised at the stakeholder meetings. But just briefly, I think it would be at the time of application and the time that the measures, are going forward. So that would be, and the composition of your building matters on the utility side, and it matters in calculating what the measures you'd be eligible for and how much your rebate would be. But largely, if it's a tenant that's going to be in between income one year or maybe eligible one year and not eligible the next, it would matter in the year that you apply for those programs. Given that affordable multifamily housing is generally made up of low-income tenants or lower-income tenants or moderate-income tenants, the policy decision as far as inclusion of multifamily properties, that there are all kinds of reasons why they wanted to include it, but I guess in sum, I just say that, you know, they recognize that this is a long-term investment that affordable multifamily housing is making in the low-income community. So, you know, even if it's not necessarily a person at 150% of the poverty guidelines, they recognize that over the long term, it's made up of low-income households, so they're going to be providing services, but it's a snapshot.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Short answer.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
This is Alan. The household that we reside in, it's multifamily, but it's a historical building that was built in 1881, and the exterior walls are stone and the interior walls are plaster. Would that have? I'm taking that it would play a role in determining how much energy efficiency that could be applied to the building.
Yeah. It certainly would play a role, but it wouldn't exclude you from receiving all kinds of other energy efficiency. Whether or not they're going to come in, what they generally do for programs in a comprehensive type of project, they would come in and do like an energy audit and see what makes sense, see what is cost effective for them to install. And so while, you know, insulation may not work for a building like that, or, you know, you may not be able to as far as building codes and historical preservation codes go, but they could certainly swap out appliances or put in smart strips or, you know, install LED light bulbs throughout. There's, you know, I wouldn't say that the composition of the building is going to impact participation in the program. It'll just impact what measures are actually incentivized.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments that we can take? Great. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for getting on today, and we look forward to seeing you folks at these meetings coming up in October. Just a reminder that the webinar will be, or the PowerPoint will be sent out today, and the webinar will be available next week online on thehousingalliancepa.org. Thanks again. Have a good one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.